puzzle rush, one of the best ways of improving your chess, as well as probably one of the most fun ways of doing it. So how do you solve the first 10 puzzles you get in Puzzle Rush? Well, I like to do mine in survival because I think even if you do one of the time variants of it, you're using the same patterns that you do in survival, you're just trying to find it quicker. So that's my go-to. So this is puzzle 1 that it's given me for today. And actually usually in the first 10, you just need to look at common tactics and common ideas that you're going to need. And one of the main ones is back rank checkmate. So this is where the king has got no escape squares, and so you're looking to provide a check on the back row that would win the game. So first puzzle, the first thing that we're looking at is this back rank is undefended, so we can bring our rook in to checkmate. And often it's the case, certainly in the first 10, that you get a few back rank problems here. So again, similarly, we've got 2 pawns blocking the king, but there's this space here. However, this is attacked by the bishop, so the king can't escape up this way. Therefore, we just need to give a check to secure a checkmate in 1. So again, second puzzle, we're looking for a check, and we can confirm that this gives you a back rank checkmate. First 3 puzzles, all the same theme. Again, king blockaded in by the pawns. We've got the ability to put our rook down to e1 and provide a check, which is checkmate in 1 move. So again, the first 3 are all the same theme. Rook down to e1 with a check and mate. Now, here we go, something slightly different. So again, once you've eliminated the possibility of a back rank checkmate, again, the king can't go anywhere, but we don't have any means of providing a check with a rook or a queen. We then look instead at what can we do with moves that are forcing. So again, usually in the first 10, you'll find some checks are the way to go to try and solve these puzzles. And actually, regardless, I always like to start with forcing check moves. So the first one I can see is this bishop coming to take the pawn on c2. However, that's not checkmate in 1 because the king has an escape square. It can move over to a1. So I suppose that brings me to tip number 2, which is don't rush into playing these moves. You want to be able to try and calculate this in your head all the way to the end for it, rather than just seeing a check and playing it, because you've got no way of knowing whether that's the right move or just a 1-move threat to provide a check. So here we can provide a check on c2, and that's the only way that we've got of providing a meaningful check. So let's follow that line through. So if we take on c2, the only squares that the king has available is to move over to a1. And then what checks do we have in this position? Well, we can't put the knight onto c2 because that's the square we're occupying with our bishop, but we would have bishop to b2 at the end there, which would be a checkmate. So now that we're happy with both moves, is going to lead to a checkmate. We can take with the bishop. Okay, it doesn't even require us to play a second move. But I still think it's important that you calculate all the moves that are forcing, and you can see it through to the end. So here, first way, is there a back rank checkmate? No. Instead, what can we do that's forcing with checks? Well, the only check we've got available is queen checking on g2. That is a checkmate in 1 move. So the first time you've got to do is look at what you're threatening and check if that works. Even though they're threatening, opponent is threatening some bits down here, our threat is a mate in 1, so we can just go ahead and capture that. And I suppose that after back rank checkmates, the next standard theme is, can you take one of the pawns surrounding their king in a way that it's supported? So here you'll notice what checks do I have here? I've got queen takes on h7. And this is often a theme of, can the king take back? No, because the bishop in c2 is protecting. Therefore, this check and capture is a checkmate in 1, so this is the right move to look for. So again, here, the first thing we've got to be looking at is what checks do we have in the position. We have 2, queen up to f6 is one of them, and bishop to g7 is the other one. And hopefully you can see that bishop to g7, so if we were to do this straight away, the king could just capture it, and there's no good follow-up checks. Whereas if we were to go here first with our queen, check, the only move is king over to g8, and then we can slide our queen into g7, another check, and that one is checkmate. So this is a 2-move checkmate, checking first on f6, and again we don't need the follow-up. So again, similar thought process here. We want to be looking at various checks that we can do. So the first ones that you can see are queen takes h7 and queen to g7. They should be the two that you can spot with your queen. Now, ideally, we'd like to play one of these two, but they're not supported by any of our other pieces. So if you imagine that pawn wasn't there on h2 and the rook could come through, that would be checkmate in one move. So I'd first start by evaluating if these two were any good. So if I was to take here, the king can take it back, and I don't have a decent follow-up in that line. If I was to go here and the king takes, I've got some options of knight taking here, or knight taking here, or knight moving there. But again, I don't see them as providing us with anything useful. So we've exhausted the checks we can do with the queen. The other move to consider that can provide a check is with the knight. So even though it looks a bit strange, knight can check on g6 with a check here. And then upon first thought, you might think that the pawn could take it back because that pawn is protecting the g6 pawn. But because of this pin, it's unable to move. So actually, you'll find when the knight takes on g6, it's providing a check. The king can't move. It can't take back with the pawn. So that is checkmate. So here again, we're going to be looking, do we have any good checks that we can do? The only one that I can see is bishop down to d5, providing a check. And actually you can see that once the king moves out of the way, we're not only providing a check, but we're also pinning it to the rook. So wherever the king moves, even if they go to any of these available squares, we will be able to, after we've checked here, pick up the rook on h1. They will then take back either with the king or the rook. And if we count the material at that stage to assess whether that is likely to be good enough, we would have two rooks and two pawns against a rook and a bishop and two pawns. The only other candidate move would be to take on c3. That isn't a check. And what can white do in response? They're threatening to put their rook down to h8 and checkmate us. So we can get out of that by taking their rook. So I think this has got to be the move. It's a check and forcing. And the only other thing to consider here is, are there any more good checks that we could do or captures? So this is the checks. This is the first thing I'd consider. But no, because pawn takes, and that doesn't leave us in a very good position. And any other move that isn't a check or eliminating that rook on h1 is going to result in us getting checkmated. So I think the only move is for us to eliminate the rook there. So again, do we have any good checks in the position? The only one we have is queen takes on f2. That would be a check. It's supported by our rook. The only square that the king has is over to h8. And then we've got a few different checks we can do with the queen. We could go there, there, or there. But on any of those squares, the rook could capture. Or we could then take check, king goes across. Or we could then take on g2, and that would be checkmate. So we've got a forcing combination of two moves again, starting with a check with the queen. And finally, the second check now is checkmate. And here we go, puzzle number 10. So to get through your first 10 set of puzzles, again, let's look at some check lines. We can't check with the bishop, so we're left with our queen. So what checks do we have available? We've got one there, three here, one there, and another one there. So I think take them in whatever order you like. Eventually you'll kind of see the pattern recognition of which is the right one to be looking at. So if we start here, that can be taken by the king, so that's going to be no good. Queen here could be an option because it gets blocked, and then we have the option of going to one of these squares afterwards. So that's a possible. Queen here can be taken by this queen. Queen here, either the king could run away or it could block. So again, that's a possible. Queen here, check. The knight comes in the way. And the only other option is that we could try and take the pawn. But given if we count the material, white has two rooks, a knight and a bishop. We only have one rook, a knight and a bishop. So we're down on material by a rook. So taking the pawn isn't going to materially swing the game in our favour. So the last move to consider if we're looking at checks is queen to e3. And white doesn't have a response to this because all of the available squares to the king have been taken. So queen to e3, is checkmate and solves it there. So that's how you do the first 10 puzzles on Puzzle Rush.